In this video, we're going to be speaking to shooting interviews. So we're collecting footage and we need to get some information from another knowledgeable person, and we need to make it compelling and engaging and immersive for our audience. What are the considerations we need to make in regards to that? The first thing up is going to be, what is it that we're talking about? What is the subject? And specifically, is it a sensitive subject? Is it humorous? Is it informative, educational, entertaining? All of those kind of things are going to be important to understand fully, and whether or not maybe it's a serious subject, but there's a certain personality or a level of humor about it that we want to incorporate or harness or something like that. But regardless, it's important to understand what is the main ideas, the main subject matter that we're going to be dealing with, because it's going to determine a whole bunch of other things in our process here. Specifically, who is it that you're speaking to? And consider that we don't necessarily want to have just one side, one piece of information. We want as much information as possible. So, for example, if the subject matter is going to be like city council and who's running for office this particular election season, then we're going to need to speak to not just one of the candidates, but both of the candidates. We're going to get both people's point of view, and we're going to be collecting information from both of these people. We also probably want to interview people that are going to be affected by whatever the subject matter is, right? So citizens of the area that is under scrutiny. So it's not just a single person necessarily. We want to make sure that we have a well-rounded interview process, right? So we don't want to necessarily just talk to a whole bunch of people that agree with one another. We want to get some of the nitty-gritty arguments. We want differing information. We want different sources, and we want different perspectives, of course. So make sure that you understand fully the subject matter and who might be the right sort of authority figure to speak on that, and what different perspectives can you gather by speaking with multiple people. Some of that previous stuff about subject might also determine where you're going to actually film the interview. What is the location for this? Are you meeting somebody in their office? Is it possible that you could change the location and set up and have more time to set up the technical equipment that you're going to need in order to make the best interview capture possible? But also maybe a location that better sort of emphasizes the subject matter. If you're talking about like the manufacturer of soda cans in a factory, you don't necessarily want to sit in an office. You want to be on location in those places and see some of the machinery and be in that environment. So location scouting is going to be a big part of pre-production for filming interviews. What types of places are really going to benefit the overall message that is trying to get across, the subject matter at hand, right? What type of style interview are you going to go with? Is it a man on the street just randomly sort of poking a microphone in front of people's faces? Or is this like a sit down, very planned and coordinated interview with like a daytime, like with Oprah or with Ellen DeGeneres or something like that, where you have like a set and you've got chairs that are angled towards each other, but mostly for the cameras, and you've also got sort of a staged area with a coffee table and some items on there to dress things up a little bit. Is that the style it's going to be? Is it an investigative report where it's like one person sitting directly across from another person at a table? There's lots of different styles for interviews, and it's not like one has any particular sort of weight over another, but there are different circumstances where you might want to use one instead of another, and maybe one lends itself towards comedy a little bit easier than another, something like that. But also, it's going to affect all the technical stuff, from where your lights are going to be. Can you even control lights in this, if it's a man on the street sort of situation? Or maybe you have to have the light mounted on the camera, which would be different than having your standard 3-point lighting setup if you're in a more controlled environment, right? So style is going to be affected also, and it's important to really kind of curate that stuff up front. Know what you're going for. How are you going to compose your shot? You've got your location, your subject matter, your interviewee. You've decided what style you're going to use. how are you going to compose your shots to make these things really, again, just engaging for your audience? Is the interviewer standing or positioned so that the subject is not looking directly into the camera? Is there a circumstance where looking directly into the camera and being centered in the frame is exactly what you're looking for? That all depends based on subject matter and sort of your intention behind the interview. But spending a little bit of time composing your shot, but also knowing ahead of time what you're kind of going for, what's going to work for the type of subject matter that you're working with, so that you can quickly get to that place or even be most of the way set up before your interviewee even arrives. Okay, finally moving on to the shot type. This is different than the interview style, whereas I'm talking about sort of investigative reporting. Maybe you're on the other side of a table, or you're facing the camera, or it's a man on the street. The shot type is going to be, well, is it a two-shot? Do we have a wide shot of both people speaking? Is that all we need? Maybe we should also have an additional camera on each person. Maybe we don't want to see the interviewer at all, so we actually want to have two different shots on the interviewee. Maybe we have one standard sort of medium shot that's like waist up and looking on 1/3 of the screen, looking off the other side. But then you have a zoomed in like profile shot from the side that's going to be sort of your secondary shot. Or would it be useful for the type of thing that you're doing to have an over-the-shoulder shot? So you actually include the interviewer in the shot, but from their shoulder and over. So there's all sorts of different shot types that you can include too, and maybe a variety of those is what's needed for your type of project. Okay, lots of things to consider, right? Think about all of these things that need to happen before the interview begins. You need to address lighting, right? Are you going to be able to kill the house lights and make the most out of natural incident light? And once you do, is it giving you the effect that you want, or do you need to block those things and start from scratch with your own 3-point lighting setup, using a key light on one side of the axis, using a fill light to sort of dial in the amount and intensity of shadows, and a backlight to sort of separate the subject from the background? Do you want to include the background? Is that part of the storytelling? All that is going to be affected in the lighting stage. And finally, what type of things are you going to ask? Rule number 1 is none of the yes or no questions, right? You want to get as much of a response out of your interviewees as possible. Consider also that it's important, well, you're better off if you collect more content than you need. You can always dial back, but you can't necessarily reschedule an interview or something like that. So you need to be over-prepared with questions. You need to ask questions that lead to talking points, not yes or no responses. However, there are some circumstances where it's very important to get a direct and clear question. So these rules are meant to be broken a little bit. But also avoiding the questions that are going to lead to shutdown. Right? Sometimes questions might make your interviewer sort of turn off. And maybe that's not completely storming out of the interview or something like that, but regardless, like you might lose a little bit of the relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee. You got to be careful about the kinds of things that you're asking. All right, so there's some tips about shooting your interviews. Make sure that you collect as much content as possible, multiple angles of different things, and give yourself lots of material to work with.